On page 138, under Creating Organizational Reality, Morgan says, "In talking about culture, we are really talking about a process of reality construction." So I want to talk here about that process of reality construction. This is a really important idea for the cultural metaphor, is that the reality that we inhabit is not just an objective given reality, but it's something that is actually constructed through a social process. So I want to do this through using an example, and I was thinking about this, what to use as an example while I was out cross-country skiing yesterday, so I thought I would use that. Yesterday I decided to go cross-country skiing. So I drove by myself up to the Trent Nature Sanctuary, and I skied the blue trail on the north side of the road, and then I crossed over the road and I skied the red trail along the side of the canal. I was out for about an hour, and then I got back in my car and I drove home. So if we're talking about culture, the first thing to note is that I am, by background, English. So cross-country skiing is a cultural import for me. It's based on techniques and technology developed by Norwegians and Finns and Swedes. And so because of intercultural interaction, my English dad was familiar with this Nordic sport, and so he introduced it to me as a child growing up in Canada. And part of the reason cross-country skiing is attractive to me is its association with those hardy Nordic cultures. And I have some pictures here that give you just some of my stereotypical views of Nordic countries and people there. I bought my skis secondhand, or third hand or fourth hand or something at a ski swap, and I got them for $10. About 3 or 4 years ago. Now, that action of buying my skis secondhand for a low price has a couple of different possible meanings that are available to me through my culture. So, through my culture has various ideas about used goods. And one of the ideas that's, I think, important in Western consumer culture is the idea that new is better than used. So in a sense, getting used goods, is inferior. And I can't be as positive about getting used skis as I would have if I had bought new skis. I can't ascribe quite as positive a meaning to it. But the act of actually getting them at this excellent price in itself is worth something, because shopping carefully and being frugal, these are all cultural ideas, and they're all actually, also can be good things within my culture. And then there's also another third point, I guess, about identity, which is, what kind of person buys things secondhand versus what kind of person buys things new. And again, culture has all sorts of possibilities to suggest for this, right? And one thing that I could suggest is that one possibility that culture suggests here is that somebody who has to shop for secondhand things is not quite as successful in life as somebody who can go to shops and buy their things new. But again, that's only one possible meaning that the culture offers. There are, of course, lots of successful people who also enjoy getting a good deal and thinking of themselves as clever, thrifty shoppers and saving their money and so on. So there are several possibilities here, but they all come from my culture. Now, because they're old skis, they're the kind that need to be waxed. I'm not sure I can tell you exactly what it is I like about waxing my skis, but I'll suggest that here culture provides me with reasons to explain my choice, that is, to make sense of my actions, and it also provides my wife with reasons to explain hers. She has waxless skis. She explains her preference with reference to our culturally constructed ideas about time, the idea that time is very precious and shouldn't be wasted. This might seem like an obvious reality, but in fact time has very different meanings across different cultures. In international business, we see this in different values placed on punctuality. An American or a German or an English person, and people from many other European cultures, to those people, starting and finishing on time is very important, and that has priority over almost any other concern. In other cultures, it is understood that situations will often arise that have to take priority over schedule. So back to me and my skis. My skiing is something that I would consider a leisure activity. Categories are cultural creations. The idea that activities can be divided into work and leisure activities is a good example of this. So when we define something as work, we have different expectations about it. We bring different attitudes to it. We experience it differently. And when it's done, we feel differently about having done it. So we might be more likely, for example, to experience a sense of accomplishment after completing work activities. So I made the decision to go skiing, and because it's leisure rather than work, I feel some slight guilt about doing it at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon. However, skiing is also different from watching TV. Another cultural concept is relevant here, the concept of fitness and exercise. So within my culture, fitness is seen as good and it's important, and exercise has this almost moral value. So the fact that I'm dedicating time, which again my culture tells me is precious and shouldn't be wasted, the fact that I'm dedicating time to fitness sort of counteracts the guilt of my violating other norms about putting work before play. And also importantly, the fact that I construct this as exercise rather than just recreation affects the kind of things that I pay attention to. So I'm conscious of my heart rate and of my pace, and I pay probably less attention to the scenery than I might, and I tend to look at the downhill parts of the trail more as challenges to my skill rather than just, a fun opportunity to blast down a hill. So fitness in my culture is a virtue, but it's also, my culture tells me that fitness is a good thing, but it also tells me that it's not really enough just to be fit. I should also look fit. So there's this connection between fitness and body image. And culture provides us with ideas of what an attractive, a good body looks like. This is especially true for women, but it's increasingly becoming true for men as well. So in my mind, using the ideas that are supplied by culture, skiing is also moving me a step closer to looking like some ideal. Which my culture tells me is not only attractive but also masculine. And again, ideas around what is masculine and what is feminine, I rely on my culture to provide me with those ideas, and I use those ideas in my decision making. But they don't exist objectively out there in the world. They're ideas that my culture creates. Culture also tells me something about what it means to do things alone or as part of a group. So even things that I do on my own can still be cultural activities. Culture also shapes my attitude towards risk. So when I go skiing, it helps me define what aspects of skiing are dangerous and maybe how much I should fear those dangers. So because of the way that culture informs us about these things, the decision about going skiing alone into a place where there are few people is different for me than it is for a woman. And it's not just because the risks might be different, but it's because culture shapes the way that we perceive those risks. So in this case, skiing, I can ski with people. There's nothing wrong with that, but I can also ski alone. That can also make perfect sense within my culture, and I give meaning to that. And one of the meanings, going by yourself off into the countryside, it's about this idea of experiencing nature in solitude, and it's refreshing to your mind, and these are culturally derived ideas. I just talked about that when I go skiing, I'm going out into nature. Nature is another category that is constructed by culture. We have culturally determined ideas about what nature is. So my attitudes towards nature are shaped by my culture. There's a strain within the English culture that I have inherited. Probably owes something to the Romantic poets and has all kinds of other origins. But in my culture, there's this perspective that there's this kind of a spiritual value in spending time in nature. So my culture also defines what nature is for me. It gives me these categories of, again, categories are important features that culture provides us. The idea of wild versus cultivated. So there's the category of wilderness at one far end of this, and the Trent Nature Sanctuary doesn't really fit into my category of wilderness, but it still fits into my idea of nature. And so in my culture, which is also shaped by Canadian outdoors culture, so these things are kind of hierarchical. So an experience of true wilderness is really a higher order experience than being in a managed forest or being on a farm. From another cultural perspective, someone might laugh at my experience. I'm a suburban kid just deluding myself into thinking that the overgrown farm at the Trent Nature Sanctuary is some kind of nature. And then to another cultural perspective, going out into nature is incomprehensible. It almost doesn't make sense as a thing to do, because by definition, nature is a place where there is no human culture. And places that are without human culture are essentially deserts. So if somebody is from an urban culture where they spend all their life within humanly socially created spaces and interacting in this cultural environment, to leave all of that behind and go out into nature, it's possible to view that as attractive, but it's also possible to see that as not really making any sense, because why would you leave society behind? The place of human beings is in society. So culture gives me all these possible meanings to choose from and to think about when I think about doing something that involves going out into a space that I define as nature. So I finished skiing and I come back home. You can see my house doesn't look like much on the outside, but inside it's much better. Now this is not my house. These are just some different ideas of what home potentially looks like. So again, the idea of home is a culturally constructed idea, and it's going to differ from culture to culture. You may have many different ideas. The idea of home is a very important one in many cultures, but what exactly it means can vary. So I've had my experience, and I've talked about some of the ways that culture really made that experience have a particular meaning for me. But note that culture didn't determine my behavior. I didn't do everything that I did because culture made me do it. All along the way, I made choices. I could have worked instead of going skiing, or I could have taken it easy and stopped a few more times along the trail and listened to the quiet. I could have gone skiing with someone. And what culture does is it gives me a framework for making those choices meaningful. So even where my actions are goal-oriented, so for example, getting fit, it's my culture that supplies me with the value of these goals. It tells me why fitness is important. It tells me that fitness is important. It tells me why fitness is important. So it's culture that gives that meaning, rather than fitness having some objective value in itself. So culture doesn't make my decisions for me, but I rely on culturally supplied meanings in order to set my goals and to make choices. So culture isn't a thing that just exists out there somewhere. It's something that we collectively are in the process of constructing on an ongoing basis. So culture continually arises through our interactions with each other. For example, if I tell this story, about going skiing, probably the listener is going to respond in a way that affirms the social meanings that I relied upon to make my decision. Whether they agree you know, oh sure, yeah, life's too short to spend all your time, working at the office, or whether they disagree. No wonder you don't get ahead if you're, taking time off to go skiing in the middle of the day. Whichever of those positions they take, they still do that in a framework that has shared meanings about things like time, work, leisure, fitness, and so on. So, however they respond to my story, they probably are still going to reaffirm all of those cultural categories and the meaning of those things. So it's because of the social nature of this process of creating culture, it's because it's a social process that we talk about the social construction of reality.